that gave me the confidence to say, like, you know what? Worst case scenario is that I just make the money from these two, right? Like I can do it. I remember my very first month, we billed like $2,000, which freelance is cool, but when it's $2,000 and that's the only money you made, and you've got like student loans and a house and car payments, a little dicey.
I've known Matt Adams for the better part of a decade. We've worked on some interesting projects together, which we'll reminisce about as we dive into how he's built an agency out of what started as a freelance career. We talk a lot about something that's hard for freelancers to talk about, and that's cash flow. Feast, famine, and client relationships have all been themes of this season of How I Built It, and they are related to the same thing: managing your money properly so that you can survive as a business. Let's hear how Matt Adams does that. Hey everybody, before we get started, I want to tell you about my online membership and community creator courses. So I know that when you want to learn something new, the natural thing you probably do is go to Google or YouTube. I do the same thing. And that's really great for one-off projects. I used a YouTube video to learn how to change a light switch in my house. But I am not a big fan of YouTube for learning new skills, right? Because there are lots of videos on every topic. But which one is best and who do you trust? What order do you even watch the videos in, and will you get the support you need? These are all things that YouTube or other potentially free videos can't do for you. So I started creator courses a few years ago with the idea of just putting online courses out there, and I decided to morph it into a membership last year. So stop wasting your time hunting and pecking for the right learning resources and tools. Over at Creator Courses, you can become a member and take all of the courses that we have to offer included in that membership. And those courses focus on everything from just basic WordPress up to learning how to build websites without code, something you don't necessarily need to do in this day and age. And all of the courses are developed by me. And if you listen regularly, you know that I've been a developer for decades at this point. And I have lots of experience building websites. I'm a teacher at heart, and I've created courses for LinkedIn Learning and things like that. So on top of the courses, we're also a community, and members get access to forums and Slack and office hours with me. And so I just wanted to let you know about that and encourage you to join if you haven't already. Listeners of the show, exclusively for listeners of the show, you can save 15% on all memberships, including the lifetime membership. All you have to do is visit creatorcourses.com/build. That's creatorcourses.com/BUILD. Thanks so much. Now let's get on with the show. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of How I Built It, the podcast that asks, how did you build that? Today, my guest is Matt Adams. He is the head of intergalactic operations at Factor One. Matt, how are you today?
I'm great, Joe. How are you?
I'm fantastic. So for some background for the listeners, Matt and I have worked on and off together for several years at this point. I feel like
it might be 10.
I was going to say, I think we were connected around the same time I went to my first an event apart, and that was 2010. Or 2011, something like that. But it was probably shortly before that. So it's like a crazy thing to have a business relationship with somebody for a decade, to me at least.
I'm with you. Yeah. I don't feel that old, so.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I'm only 34 years old. In my case, at least. But today I'm excited because we're going to talk about how to stay sane growing from freelance to agency owner. You've been running, well, I'll let you introduce yourself, but I'll just say you've been running your agency Factor One for the last 15 years. Is that right?
Yeah. It's been a very wild ride, but it's been 15 years, and it's hard to think that it's been that long because, again, I don't feel that old, but here we are.
Man, that's wild. So For the listeners, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I have a pretty diverse background. I, went to art school for traditional art, learned some digital design along the way. Thought that was pretty awesome. This is like early 2000, 2001. The web was starting to take off, and I was like, this coding thing looks pretty awesome. Let's try that. And there was no courses, nothing like that. So I just kind of got started. And I got introduced to like WordPress at one point in time. I think it was like 1 point something, just before 2.0. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna start building some websites for people I know. And so I just kind of dove in, to be honest. There wasn't books. I looked like, I think I have like an HTML and a CSS book, and kind of just ran from there. I built a lot of Flash websites. Like I'll admit it. I use Flash a lot. I also built one of the only Flash CMSs using ActionScript, and we were saving to a plain text file. And so my clients would like hit some special key command like Control E, and it would bring up the editor, put in a password, and it was all stored in plain text. Like it was all like just prime for hacking, but no one figured it out. Yeah, Flash websites were like the thing, and we built awesome ones. And then we'd have clients like, what about a blog? What about a podcast? And what about, I want to stick an image in the middle of this text editor? And it was always, no, it's Flash. You can't do that. And so that's when I really kind of like dove more headfirst into WordPress, and just spent years in advanced WordPress. I mean, since like version 2 was released. So to date, Factor One has created 300 fully custom WordPress sites in the last 15 years. And we actually still host about 200 of them. So we kind of heavily maintain a lot of our clients over the years.
Wow, that's amazing. And so it sounds like we probably got into WordPress around the same time. I remember like 1.5 was the first version I used, and I never made Flash sites, but for those who don't know,
stay away.
Flash, I mean, they were like the way to do anything really, like because JavaScript wasn't nearly as powerful then as it is now, and so Flash was the way to do cool stuff.
Exactly, and it was browsers probably couldn't even handle it back then anyway with JavaScript we use today.
Oh yeah, for sure. So that's awesome. So you've been making websites for about 15 years, and you started off kind of freelancing. When did you make the jump to being to like kind of the agency world?
Yeah, so that was 2004. I think I was working at a print agency and just loved the web. Also really hated my boss, which is always an excellent reason to quit and start your own company. My advice to people is always like, don't do it for these kind of reasons, because you'll pay for it later.
Yeah.
But I just kind of on a whim decided, like, you know what, I'm going to do this. I had 1 or 2 freelance clients that were pretty consistent, and then a few projects here and there. And it was those consistent ones that gave me the confidence to say, like, you know what, worst case scenario is that I just make the money from these 2, right? Like I can do it. I remember my very first month, we billed like $2,000, which freelance is cool, but when it's $2,000 and that's the only money you made, and you've got like student loans and a house and car payments, a little dicey. And my wife actually didn't have a job at the time either. She had just gotten laid off.
Wow.
So I look back and I was like, God, I was an idiot, but it worked out. What better time to take a risk than when you're young and dumb?
Yeah, absolutely. I went out full on my own after my daughter was born. I'm like, yeah, new kid, wife on maternity leave. Now's a great time.
It's a perfect time.
Yeah.
But you know what? I look back on it and I do appreciate it, because my back was up against the wall. Like I don't have rich family, parents, anything like that. Like I had nothing to fall back on. And so it was one of those like just hustle and grind and get it done, because there's not a plan B. There is no option. There's no backup plan. And I didn't even see like the idea of going back and getting a job somewhere else it wasn't even an idea. Like that was dumb. Why would I do that? This is what I'm doing. So it really forced me to be all in, which I do appreciate and still would stand by it today, of like, you know what, be all in or don't do it. Contingencies are they give you a reason to hesitate, I think.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. You have, they talked about that in like a Friends episode, right? They told Rachel to quit so that she had the fear to actually pursue a job she wanted to.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it's the same, right? Like when you have real stakes, you got to make real decisions. And I think that's part of the conversation we're having today, right? Is uh at least for me, when I was just kind of freelancing, I was like, yeah, I'll charge this, I'll make some money, I can support myself. And now I'm like, I need an actual income plan because I
Yeah.
have a house and a kid and another kid on the way as we record this. And
Right. I heard. Congratulations.
yeah, oh, thank you very much. We're super excited. Um, and just I can't just be like, oh yeah, I'll just charge like $2,000 for this website and it'll be great and I'll keep most of it and then pay a little bit for taxes.
Yeah. Like I'm not a big fan of hourly rate pricing.
Mhm.
I probably haven't done hourly rate pricing here at Factor One in probably 14 years. We started that way maybe initially, but quickly moved on to more of a project rate. Uh, but even then, like so many freelancers don't even know what their hourly rate should be.
Yeah.
They just kind of pick. They'll ask around and see that what their friends are charging, and they'll use some sort of justification of like I'm better than them, or they're better than me, or they've been doing it longer, so they can charge a little more. I'll just be a little less than them, or it's a competitive thing of I want to be a little less than the guy next door so that I
Mhm.
can win the job. And so we end up with an entire ecosystem of freelancers who have just made up baseless dollar rates, and they're like, it's anywhere from $50 an hour to 100 and something an hour, and most of them have no real foundation where they came up with that number. And so I actually do a little bit of like workshops here and there here in the Phoenix area for AIGA, which is the professional design association, and there's chapters in every city, but here in Arizona I kind of pioneered the business of design model of like let's teach freelancers how to do this. I ended up creating a calculator because so many of them had no clue. And so I just worked backwards. I'm like, how much do you need? How much do you need to pay yourself to live? How much does it cost for your software, your Adobe, your hosting fees? Like, what are you paying every single month? So I actually built out an entire worksheet, and I can actually share it with your in the show notes, Joe. But it's really great to
Yeah,
just
that'd
work
be great.
backwards and then even pick what do I want my profit to be? Like, I want to make make this dollar amount this year, but I also want to have like a bonus. I want to say like if I get this number, I want it to be a $10,000 or $20,000 bonus in the year, and call that my profit. So really treating yourself as an employee. That's a cost of goods sold, and then you have your owner bonus on top of that. So even as a freelancer, you can think with that mindset, and it works backwards. And the other real key thing is knowing your actual hours are available in the week. Like everyone's like, oh, I'll work 40 hours a week. Like, when are you going to do invoicing? When are you going to follow up?
Mhm.
When are you going to work on your sales and your marketing and go to that event and meet with that client? Like, is that all billable? No, it's not. And so you got to really think through like 20, 30 hours a week of true billable time. I mean, we're an agency. We have a staff of 5, and we're sitting here, and I know that my production staff is only truly billable 25 hours a week. Uh, we're not here 40. We run a little bit of a different kind of
Mhm.
a work model here where we only work about 35 hours a week. We kind of just take half day Fridays and get out of here early.
Nice.
Uh, and then Fridays in general are learning days. So we actually use them as in-house time, developing new projects, new tools, new resources, reading, sharing, teaching, kind of just growth days. So I only have like 4 working days, and then you guys still got to account for meetings and stuff. And so I'm saying a full-time production employee is only available 25 billable hours a week. And I find that's shockingly accurate for freelancers too, is that you can only have 25 hours of actual production time unless you're burning the candle at both ends.
Right.
Uh, so you got to work backwards off of 25, not 40 or not 50. 50 billable hours a week is unsustainable. And so you got to work backwards off that like 25 or 30 number. And that's all you're available. And is it, what's your number? And once I built the calculator and used it myself, I was actually shocked. We had to raise, like I said, we're not hourly, but I had to raise my kind of baseline of like, oh, we should, we need to pad our numbers a little bit more. I'm not accounting it, at the right number.
Yeah, that's super interesting. You raise a lot of really good points there. Um, the first being like figure out what you need to make to live, right? I mean, that's like if you go into a full-time job, you probably have an idea of how much you should make in a year. You're not just going to be like, oh, well, it seems like I should make this much. You need to take a job that will pay you what you can to live. Um, the same thing, as you said, should go with freelancing. You need to figure out how much money you need to make, or if you are leaving your job, um, can you replace your income, or were you getting more than you needed to get paid? And so what can you live on up until that point and pay yourself accordingly?
Yeah.
I read a fantastic book a couple of years ago and I immediately implemented the system, but profit first.
Oh,
Um,
that's where I got some of the model from. Love
yeah,
that book.
yeah, so good because it really makes sure that you are paying yourself and you're putting a little bit of money aside for a bonus. And my first bonus of the quarter for 2020 is going to go partially to our baby moon of sorts. We're going to Disney World.
Nice.
Yeah, and we're gonna go. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I'm going to build a lightsaber at Galaxy's Edge. It costs $200, which seems like an outrageous amount for me to build a lightsaber, but I love Star Wars, so don't at me. But this is money that like my family's never gonna see. My business is not reliant on it. It's like legit just money for me to have fun with, and I will have a lot of fun doing that.
Absolutely.
So.
No, that's the way to think of it too, is that profit first mindset. I mean, we don't run hourly, but we still try and calculate the work we do loosely in hours. We need to know that I'm not wrong. We try and bill actually not even project based. We've moved a little bit past that to a little bit more evaluation based. Like what's this worth in terms of an investment? If I can provide to you millions of dollars worth of revenue with the work that I'm doing, isn't that worth 5 or 10% of that millions of dollars, not $20,000 because that's what the hours come up to? But we still want to double check all of our hours. I want to make sure that I'm not wrong in some of that space. And so we will still run our hourly calculations like, hey, this project is 250 hours and it's going to take this many weeks to produce that 250 hours. And then I know that my minimum billing on that is at least my hourly rate plus 25%. So I could say, hey, this $10,000 project really does need to be, closer to 12,000. And then I still want to look at the client and be like, this thing's really worth like 30. Because I'm taking the risk and I'm doing it right. And I'm doing it these ways. Nobody else in the market can do it this way. So it's worth 30. But I still started with my baseline hourly rate and I still started with profit in mind. Those are line items on an Excel sheet for every project we take in. And the profit is the first line. What profit is here?
Yeah.
So I think
that's
as
fantastic.
a freelancer, I wish I would have thought that way. It was usually just like, what's the minimum I can bill for this? And I really undervalued myself a lot. I would say like this takes me 10 hours, but I should have gone faster. So I'm only going to bill for 5. And so I shortchanged myself a lot just from a poor mindset. I wasn't really a negative person. I've always really positive, but for some reason or another, I kind of had like a devaluation of my own self. And so it took me years to get past that.
Yeah. I mean, I had a conversation with Nathan Ingram. His episode is aired last week as this episode comes out. So, but we talked about how like we like to help people and how do we reconcile that with kind of charging, right? Because we want to help people get their website up and running. How much do we tell them or help them with versus what do we bill them for? And it's the same kind of thing, right? Like, especially when you like what you do, these are all things that you really need to think about.
It's tough because I'm there too. I was really raised with a helping others mindset. I get a lot of personal value out of helping people. So what I've had to do is I've had to separate business from personal missions. Business exists to create revenue for the owners, to create payroll for the team, and to create a product for the customer. It doesn't exist to give you personal self-worth. It doesn't exist to give you a pat on the back that you didn't get as a child. It just can't. Because at the end of the day, these customers, as lovely and as amazing as most of them are, I love some of my customers. I've had customers for 10 years that if I am in town, I will make plans to see them. I will fly just to have lunch with one of them. I was in Chicago a week or about 2 weeks ago, right before Christmas. I was in Chicago, and it was just one of those clients. I was like, hey, we'd love to just chat before the holidays and plan out some stuff, and let's just have lunch. I flew to Chicago, had lunch, met with the client for an hour, flew home. Worth it. But at the end of the day, these people are still in it for their business. They're here for them, their missions, their objectives, and they're not technically your friends. And you need to keep that at bay, because while you are really friendly and can be really close, there needs to be the ability to sever that relationship at any point in time. That's not really the way you think of friends or family. But in business, that's the way it is. Someone will just, hey, I'm going to hire somebody else. We've lost a huge project once because the client's little brother opened a web dev studio and took all the business to them. I cannot fault them at all for that.
Yeah.
Totally get it. Do I have opinions on whether it was the right move or not? Of course I do. But at the end of the day, like, it didn't matter how close of a business friendship we had, it was gone like that. And if I hadn't intentionally sought out my own profit and protecting my own bottom line, that's all gone. As the rug got pulled out from underneath me from no fault of my own. No matter how wonderful and helpful we were, and how much value we provided the client, and how much value they provided us, gone in an instant. And so you just got to remember, like, we're here to help them. We're here to do good work, and we're here to honor our own process, honor our own bank account. And it's not that it needs to be greedy, but at the end of the day, you have to still look out for yourself. And so I go to the Peter F. Drucker model of, like, the purpose of business is to create a customer and to create a profit.
Yeah, I think that's great, right? Because you're right. That's for me, it's my job to make sure I'm providing for my family. No other business owner is going to be closer to me than my wife and daughter, right? Just like there's no way that anybody who was not that guy's brother would be closer to him than his brother.
Absolutely.
So, like, you do have to think about that stuff. And realize that you offer a good service. You should charge what you're worth. Help when you can. You mentioned value-based pricing. I might, if a nonprofit, like a legit nonprofit organization, not like the NFL, I guess that's a little bit dated, right? Because they went to a profit model or whatever.
They did. They didn't want transparency on their books anymore.
Yeah. They wanted to hide.
That's exactly what it was.
I know, right? Yeah, they wanted to hide all that concussion hush money, I guess. Whoa,
Maybe.
this podcast just got more political than it's ever gotten. But I mean, a legit nonprofit, like, if I can do something for, I don't know, 20% less than what I would normally charge because they actually need it, then yeah, I'll do that. But like you said,
be careful with that, though.
Right.
There's a lot of nonprofits that make a lot of money.
Yes. Yeah. That's a really good point. They're doing okay. Yeah. I've explicitly said that to some of my own students, where I'm like, nonprofit doesn't mean make no money. And they will all try to make you think that. But I have a couple of specific examples in mind where they legit were not making any money. But they still needed, like, at least a donation form, right?
So. One of the things, right? Exactly. One of the things for me was, I actually had a mentor tell me this. It's like, stop getting the value and your personal self-worth out of helping people that you're billing, and find other channels for that. And so, I started volunteering more in my, like, design and creative community. So I joined the board, like, I'm on the board of AIGA Arizona. And so I find value in that. I'm helping others in different ways. And so I'm getting that self-worth bucket fulfilled outside of work. I'm making sure that I nurture personal friendships just as much as I nurture a business relationship. So putting in the same kind of effort, and this sounds super analytical, and luckily none of my personal friends are developers or creatives in this space, but they're and won't hear this, but, like, I put them on a calendar. They're on a drip. Like, I get a reminder that, hey, has it been 6 weeks since I followed up with John? I should send him a quick email. And it's just because my head is so full that like I do that for sales. I do that for current customer relationships. Why can't I do it for friends?
Yeah, for sure.
So, I'll put them on I'll put them on like a nurture campaign, right? Like it sounds so formal, but there's just, we're all busy and you see each other on social media, but you forget to stop and say, hey, let's grab coffee. How are you? Like, let's really slow down, not just like each other's posts on social. So I have to give myself those nudges. Otherwise, I might forget because all of my other nudges and pushes on my CRM are for business relationships.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, I think I'm going to steal that.
One weird trick you learned on this podcast.
Yeah, right? Because I mean, that's perfect example. My friend Kat, one of my best friends from college, texted me after, I posted online that my wife is pregnant again. And she congratulated me and she asked how I was doing. And I, for the life of me, could not remember if she was pregnant with her third. And I wanted to ask how it was going, but then I was like, I didn't see anything on Facebook about it.
Mm-hmm.
I was right. But, if I had like jotted that down somewhere or like had a little nudge to be like, ask Kat how she's doing, like I wouldn't have had this like crisis of conscience where I'm like, I'm such a bad friend. I can't even remember if she's pregnant. So,
Right.
I think that's really cool. I've also told my wife that like, if something is not on the Google Calendar, it does not exist in my world.
Oh, that's the same. Yeah. Another pro tip, only have one calendar. I used to try the work calendar and the home calendar and then my own personal calendar. Like if I'm off to the dentist, I'm off to the dentist. Like I shouldn't be available on my work calendar just because I'm personally doing something in the middle of the day. And like I know, Joe, you use Calendly. Like Calendly can only sync to one calendar. So
Right.
I live out of one calendar. I just color code things like, hey, the purple things are home and the green things are personal and the blue things are work. And that's the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. If something is taking up my time, it is on my one calendar.
Yeah.
My wife has her own that is synced with mine. But if it's like something that, if we're going to like a concert or something, it goes on both of our calendars. Hers is mostly used for her work schedule.
Yeah.
So,
just talking about freelancers and calendars, like calendar out your sales time and your marketing time and your networking time and your internal production time, because that was something that I just constantly would just back burner and forget for the sake of production, because production's billable. If I can get this project done, I can bill the client and that's money in the bank. But I would do that at a cost of skipping a networking event and not going to this seminar or this workshop that I wanted to go to. I'd skip out early on a WordCamp maybe and go do work because that was important. Don't confuse short-term gains for long-term goals, because if I skip networking and marketing events, well, while I'm busy now, that means I might have a lull in 3 to 6 weeks or 3 to 6 months that these projects take to get in. And so I've gotten really diligent on my calendar to actually book out sales and marketing time. And so I have I try and review it every 2 weeks to know what's going on. And so I look every 2 weeks to make sure that I have the right networking and the right events on my calendar. And if I don't, I will still block time to do my own networking. If there's not a networking event next Wednesday when I normally have one, great. I'm going to block that time off still. And I'm going to go through my CRM and touch anybody who I haven't reached out to in a while.
Yeah, that's great.
So like plan for that time. Because again, you can only work 25 hours a week, or you should only work 25 to 30 hours a week. Fill the rest of the time with your accounting time and your personal time and your time to work out and rest and, go to the movies, but also, that sales time and that, nurture client time.
Today's episode is brought to you by Smile and their product, Text Expander. Save time typing and boost your productivity with Text Expander. I'm all about automation, and Text Expander is a great way to get started with automation. It allows you to create your own snippets for repetitive text you tend to use everywhere. Add the text, create a snippet, and boom, save precious time and keystrokes. One of my favorite snippets is for my address. So instead of typing out my full address and risking typos, I simply type $ADDR and Text Expander does the rest, filling in my full address for me. I also have snippets for my street, my city, and my zip code. But that's not all Text Expander does. With its advanced snippets, you can create fill-ins, pop-up fields, and more. You can even use JavaScript or AppleScript. Another one of my favorite and most used snippets is when I type PPT. That will take whatever text I have on my clipboard and convert it to plain text. So I'm no longer fighting formatting when I copy from a Word document, a Google Doc, or a plain HTML page, like a website. I also use it for common links, email messages, which I can completely customize with fill-ins and drop-down menus, and even date calculations. I'm currently writing a book, and Text Expander has been instrumental with that. Text Expander is available on macOS, Windows, Chrome, iPhone, and iPad, so pretty much anywhere you do computing. If you've been curious about trying Text Expander or automation in general, now's the time. As a listener, you can get 20% off your first year. Just visit textexpander.com/podcast and let them know how I built it sent you. That's textexpander.com/podcast for 20% off your first year. And now, back to the show. There are a couple of things where we can totally bring it right back. And one is calendar out your time. And the other is I want to ask you about kind of time tracking and maybe the tools you use. But let's talk about calendaring out your time, because I very recently just started aggressively time boxing. So it's not that for this 1 hour I'm going to do this one thing, but it's more like, I mean, you saw my Calendly, right? So I only record podcast episodes on a specific day, and that day is dedicated to podcasting, so I don't have to context switch or anything like that. If I have like business meetings, I'm going to really try hard. I'm not inflexible about it because I know that other people have other schedules, but I'm going to try very hard to make those Mondays, because traditionally Mondays are my least productive days anyway. Tuesdays and Fridays are my most productive days, so those are like my deep work days. Do you do something similar, or is it more like based on your production schedule over the next weeks, you just add specific time boxes where you can?
So I'm a little unique where my company is just large enough where I don't do a lot of production, if any at all. I have handed over all of the keys to development and creative to others at this point that are smarter than me. And they really are. There are times where I dive in to help. And, you know, like one of our developers was on her honeymoon. She came back and I was like, I did this, this, and this, and I had to fix this. You might want to look at it, because I definitely duct taped it. Like, there's a Band-Aid and some duct tape and some string holding this together, because the development is so much further advanced than I ever got that I duct taped it to get it back up and running or to fix what the client needed. But like, you might want to touch that later and fix that for me. Like, So I'm definitely unique where I don't have as much production as I used to, but I still have production in the business development that I have to do. And so I do box that time out. It's not so much day oriented as I do like in the day, not week oriented, like the day of the week, but I do have times in the day that I know are my sweet spots. There's a book called When by Daniel Pink, and it's really that there's 3 or 4 different types of people with circadian rhythms. I'm an early morning person. I get up at like 5 o'clock religiously since I was like 10 without an alarm, rain or shine. Like, maybe it's like I'm not feeling well, I might sleep in, but I just don't sleep in. Like, sleeping to 6 is like an anomaly, and it's weird. So I'm an early morning person. And so like, I get some of my best work done first thing in the day. And so I actually schedule that. So I take that mindset of like, this is when I'm the most productive, and I'm most productive in these ways. And so I try and find the work that fits that productivity pattern for me. And then obviously I have to deal with the fact that not everyone else is up at 6 a.m. ready to chat on a phone call like I am. So I find other things to do. Or I have clients all around the world, so I will make sure I'll make 6 a.m. phone calls to clients on the East Coast because they're 2 or 3 hours off from me. So I have no problem with that. It works out really, really well. But then I also know like after lunch is a low spot for me, but social
Mhm.
interaction gives me energy. So I will regularly schedule meetings 1 and 2 o'clock in the afternoon because that's when I
Oh,
have
wow.
a circadian rhythm low, but I can offset it with a social extrovert high. And so it works
Yeah.
out really well. So I actually find times that either complement my natural circadian rhythms or offset them. But try not to work against it, so to speak. Like that's the reason why I wouldn't do creative or development work after lunch because I want to take a nap.
Yeah. We sound very similar. I wake up around 5:30 every morning, and I use last year I took an approach that was like, I'm not gonna go to the office for like the first hour of the day or whatever, but once I have my
Mm,
coffee, like I really get into it. So I get in about an hour's worth of work before my daughter wakes up. Um, and then I really like what you said about like maybe scheduling meetings for like right after lunch because I'm the same way. I feel like I got shot with a tranquilizer dart like right after lunch. Um,
right.
and those social interactions also help me. So I'm gonna link that book
And
in the show
everyone's
notes.
different.
So yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, for
and
sure.
everyone's different. There's people who are just the most productive in the evenings and at night,
Hmm.
and awesome. That's when you get your production work done. That's when you can get your invoicing and your accounting taken care of. You still got to find that time for meetings and such, but schedule a nap. Like believe Winston Churchill was big on naps. Like,
Yeah,
and even the biography of Benjamin Franklin was like, work till 3, take a nap, take a nice long bath, and then wake up and do more work. And I'm like, that's what worked for them. Like they didn't have a 9 to 5 dictatorship of a job schedule. And so as
right.
freelancers, I mean, if you're moonlighting to a regular day job, you can use some of that to your advantage. You can say that, hey, I'm really productive from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. and just work around that and embrace it. Stop trying to fight it so much because of, social norms as much as you can. Still some things that, Target's still only open regular business hours and
Right,
then some,
right.
but
Yeah.
there's some things you got to work through. But I have a friend who's an insomniac and just has just terrible sleeping patterns. And she's like working at 2 and 3 a.m. all the time. And so as a freelancer, actually, it works out really, really well for her because she's able to get a ton of work done. And, in her case, she found that partnering with agencies solves a lot of that problem. So she became an outsource, like just overflow work for a couple of different agencies in town. So that they're doing the meetings during the day. They're talking to the clients during the day when she's sleeping and able to like knock these things out in the middle of the night. And so she found partners to help her in that space so that she doesn't have to go to a meeting at 2 p.m. Um, because she works so late. So, it just works out really well, for whatever works for you and find ways to complement that as much as you can.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And it's like one of the things that's afforded to freelancers or small business owners. So we've been talking for a bit about a bunch of things. Um
Yeah.
but maybe we can as we kind of come to the end of our general interview here. Um what was it let me start here. If somebody is a freelancer thinking of making the jump to agency owner or even bringing on a single employee, what do you think are like the main two things they need to do?
Yeah. So you cut out for just a second, but you were asking for the main two things they need to know about or need to plan for when they're jumping from kind of freelance to full-time freelance or freelance with an employee.
Yeah, yeah. So if they want to start an agency, or even just bring on another employee, what's maybe the first two things the freelancer should think about?
Definitely think about overall cash flow and forecasting. So when you take on all the extra expense of another employee or even just yourself going full time, where this is your only source of income, you really need to make sure you have 30 to 60 days pipeline in front of you. It doesn't have to be cash on hand, but it needs to be like committed. It needs to be a contract, it needs to be an invoice that's maybe net 30, something somewhere where along the lines you can look and say, hey, it's January. What money do I have in February? And where is there a gap? Uh, that's where so many people get in trouble is they just don't have enough of a runway, so to speak. If you think about like startup space, having a runway is the most important thing. And the bigger the team, the bigger the runway is necessary. And so, we've had a couple ups and downs throughout the years. And I went through, I had staff through the 2008 recession. 2017, 2018 were hard years for us as well as we transitioned and pivoted a little bit. Same thing. I had to watch that runway like a hawk. Like I knew exactly when invoices were due and when payments on things were due. And so that cash flow forecasting was the most important thing that I had to deal with. And I would find and leverage projects that, hey, if you pay me in 15 days, or if we get started now, I'll give you a couple $100 discount or $1,000 discount on this project, because I was betting against cash flow. And so, because I knew that, so I wouldn't, be a stickler for that dollar of like, hey, it's a $20,000 project, the end, where I could say, hey, you know what, we can get started a little earlier for you. Or if you're willing to maybe make, instead of making 50% deposits, let's do thirds, let's do quarters. But you got to do it now. So I would actually leverage those kind of accounting tools to help mitigate any of my cash flow issues. So if I knew that, like, hey, I've got payroll in a week and a half and I'm $1,000 short, what can I do between now and then to get $1,000 in the door, cash on hand? So that was one of the biggest things, just always being aware of that, because you're now in a business owner seat. Like, you aren't just production, especially as just getting started. You're easy to be production and then hire somebody else to also be production. But you have to watch cash flow even more, because now you just doubled your overhead most likely. And in all of most creative agencies, development shops, we're so staff heavy. Like, our biggest expenses are people. The office is cheap, the internet's cheap. Adobe licensing isn't that big. I guess it is an arm and a leg.
Relative
Adobe,
to like buying a storefront, though, it's not.
Exactly. Yeah. Having inventory, like we don't have inventory, and I, huge props to anyone who starts like a restaurant. You have inventory that literally expires in 2 days. Right. So here it's like, people is the most expensive thing, and so you need to make sure you watch that. So, one big thing for us that's been super helpful in that financial space is we are working off of last month's income. So, we're recording this here in January. My January payrolls, my rent, my everything else here is built on being paid with money I earned in December. So the money I'm earning now in January is money for February. And that's an invoice standpoint, not just actual cash on hand. So that's one of those things that's just super helpful to kind of maintain on my end, is that always watching that cash flow and always knowing where the money's coming from, so that I'm not essentially check to check, waiting for that next invoice to pay the next payroll. Like, that's where things get dangerous. So that's been big. The other thing is just the right paperwork and just the right communication along the way. Like, we document everything. I will not take verbal approvals. If they approve something on the phone, I'm like, great, you know what? I'm going to shoot you an email. I'm going to ask you for X, Y, and Z approval, and I need you to respond back yes. We've even gone a step further, and we actually have like contract level sign-offs for design and development approval. So when we deliver a design and someone says, yes, it's approved, great. We're going to take all of these JPEGs from our project management system. I'm going to stick them in a document that says, I'm approving this for design, for layout, for function, and for like content flow. Images and the actual copy can be changed in the CMS, but everything else is approved. Anything changing this will affect my cost and my timeline. And it's funny how slow people pause on that one. They'll approve something like that. I'll upload a new design, and great, approved. Go ahead and start development. Like, okay, great. Here, sign off on this. And like, all of a sudden, 3 days go by, right? Like,
yeah.
And we use PandaDoc for our documents for that, like our contracts and legal things. And you'll see that Susan opened this PandaDoc 13 times in the last 2 days. Like, oh, Susan's getting real picky and really making sure that we dotted the I's and crossed the T's. Excellent. That cut down revisions like you wouldn't believe, versus just the verbal approval or the quick email approval. So we try and really just document everything and try to make sure everything is clear as possible, because the rule on that is that if it can be misunderstood, it will be misunderstood in the wrongest way possible, and work backwards from there, right? Like,
Yeah.
If they hear your tone wrong, it's the worst way possible. If the design is wrong and they improve it, it's in the worst way possible. So when you document as much as you can, it's hopefully as clear as possible along the way.
Yeah, that is great advice. When I was when I do videos, I require a signature on the script because the script is um the final sign off before I actually start producing the video. So we have the script and we have the screen actions, and the client has to sign off on that because revisions after that
Yeah,
are costly. So yeah, I think that's
exactly.
yeah,
It's time and money. I mean, it might be a 10-minute change, but it's a 10-minute change that turns into a 20, that turns into two more changes. And the next thing you know, you're like, we lost track of all the changes. So it's not, for me,
yeah,
it's not about the 10 minutes. It's about the snowball that it creates. And then the
right.
time, because now all of a sudden we're talking about a design change that was approved.
We
So it gives you an easy backbone. And then you just call it policy. Like, hey, it's our policy to do this. Like, you make air quotes the policy, right? The bad guy. Like, oh, it's not
yeah,
me. It's our
it's
policy.
our policy.
It doesn't
Yeah,
matter if I'm a person of one. Like, it's my policy to not start work until I have a deposit. The end.
right,
Nothing against you. You're an excellent client. I'm sure you're going to pay, but we just have a policy.
right. Yep.
Uh,
And I mean, you explain the benefit of that too, right? Like I say, I require a signature on the script because in the past I didn't, and then, um, the script had to get changed, and then that ended up costing the client an extra $1,000 on this video, and I don't
right.
want you to pay another $1,000 because you didn't like the wording somewhere, or someone
Exactly.
didn't like the wording somewhere, right? So, yeah, I think that's great. So,
Yeah. So just clarity always, and then watch that money. I mean, that's the
yeah.
hardest thing.
Yeah, and it is watching the money, especially. I'm gonna from experience. If you are a freelancer who is just starting out, it's really easy to just deposit all that money in your personal account and then worry about it later. But I would encourage you to read profit first, right? Have a separate account for your bank account. Don't use PayPal as your business money. I know a lot of people do that. Um, when
Well,
I get
that's a dangerous one anyway, because
yeah,
PayPal
right,
isn't FDIC insured. Like, PayPal can yank your money for no reason at all,
right,
and they can just say, "Hey, you violated our terms and conditions."
right. As
So,
soon as I get a notification that I have money in PayPal, it gets added, it gets
yeah,
transferred out.
absolutely.
So, think about that. Put aside money for taxes. That's really important. And that's something that could bite, new freelancers. And that runway, runway was something I was very cognizant of, especially when I went out on my own. I explained to my wife, we've got 6 months runway. If I make absolutely no money, I will find a job before our
Right.
runway runs out.
Well, there's another factor there on runway is like, well, I have 6 months of money, but when do I need to start looking at the job site, right? Like, is it
Right.
a 2-month job window? Like, okay, great. So you have 4 months of true runway, and then 2 months of, the overflow runway, the emergency runway, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, uh, awesome. Well, this has been, I think, a really helpful conversation. We talked about time, managing your time, watching that cash flow, and some important staples that you should do when you take this from maybe like a hobby to a business, or
Absolutely.
just a side gig to a business. I do need to ask you my favorite question though, which is, do you have any trade secrets for us?
Trade secrets is a tough one.
Yeah.
You know, I get asked on a regular basis. We've been doing this for 15 years, so like, what's your secret? My secret is like, show up and do honest work. Like, it sounds kind of ridiculous, but in the web space and creative space, like, we are full of flaky people who will just like disappear. Um, I rescue clients so often from bad designers, bad developers who just disappeared, who just stopped wanting to do the work for whatever reason. And so we win work and we keep work because we do what we do exactly what we say we're going to do, on time and on budget every single time. Uh, it's really hard to beat, but the bar is so low. Like, so that's
Hmm.
it sounds like a terrible secret, but trust me, if you start being the only one in your neck of the woods that's doing this, you will rise above everybody else. I'm not a better designer or a better developer than anybody else. I'm a hack at best on most of these things. I'm self-taught PHP, but I had more web development clients and more web design clients than most of my friends because I just showed up. I was honest, like, hey, I don't know how to do this. I'm stuck. Give me a couple more days.
Yep.
So we would just constantly win new clients, and then we got referrals that way. Like, oh, they're super honest. And they're able to help us no matter what we did. So yeah, super little secret, but just be there, show up, do what you say you're going to do, and deliver, and you'll go far. And that's where most people, that's what separates most people from winning and failing.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, right? We've both probably had people where they've come to us and they said, yeah, the last guy just disappeared.
Right?
And
he left money on the table. Why?
Yeah,
What's
right.
wrong with him?
I don't know where all these people are going, but when I tell my clients, if you hire me, I am here till the end. So I think that's really good. Show up, do honest work. Matt, I really appreciate your time today. Where can people find you?
A number of places. I'm on Twitter and Instagram as Matt Ada, just ADA. Factor1studios.com is my company site. So that's probably the couple best places for me.
Awesome. I will link to those and everything we talked about in the show notes over at howibuilt.it. Matt, thanks again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks so much to Matt for joining me today, talking about cash flow, managing your money, and figuring out how much you need to make to survive as a business. I will definitely link to the calculator he mentioned over in the show notes. All of the show notes, you can find them at howibuilt.it/161. I also love how he talks about the importance of contracts. Last week, we spoke to Nathan Ingram, who just launched his own contract over at monstercontracts.com. So I love that Matt is reinforcing that. And of course, his trade secret: show up and do honest work. Do exactly what you're going to say you're going to do. I think that is so important because good marketing is fine, but reputation is finer. Now, if you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe to it in your podcast player of choice. Leave a rating and review over at Apple Podcasts. It really helps people discover the show. If you want to learn a little bit more about what I'm doing these days with my courses and my memberships, over at the show notes page at howibuilt.it/161, you can get a free PDF on 5 tools to help you build websites faster. And who doesn't want to do that, right? So definitely check that out. Again, the link is howibuilt.it/161. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, get out there and build something.